Welcome to Talk to Me Like I'm an Idiot. I'm your host, Angie McMahon. On this show, I interview people about jobs and topics I know nothing about. You can find us on all your favorite social sites at idiottalkshow. You can also use that hashtag to keep up with the conversation. Don't forget to tell a friend. Now, let's start the show.
I don't want to be alone in this bed. Won't you give me something I can take apart? I don't want to listen to the yelling in my head or the crying in my idiot heart. Idiot heart.
Welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have my very special guest today. He is a scientist. He is an author. Please welcome to the show, Brian Keating.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Thank you. So, Brian, I always like to start the show by saying, how do we know each other?
Yes. Well, we met via the internet, the intertubes, and specifically by Twitter about 48 hours ago.
So we don't know each other really at all.
That's right.
That's going to make this real fun.
Yeah.
So just to let you know, the podcast hasn't actually launched yet. It launches on Tuesday. So you're one of the first guests.
Cool.
You're going to be episode 7, I think. So you're going to tread on some new water here. It's going to be lots of fun.
Wow.
In general, I'm the idiot and I ask them questions and you answer them or tell me to shut up or whatever you want to do. It's going to be fun. So my first dumb question is, so let's get into some plugs and stuff. So you have written a book. Tell us the title of the book.
The book is called Losing the Nobel Prize.
And you can download that now on Kindle or you can purchase it through Amazon and bookstores, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it's in almost every major Barnes & Noble in the country and many, many smaller nooks and cranny bookshops around the world.
That's awesome. Is it your first book?
It is my first book. It's the first book I've written, and it's also the last book, all right, because it almost killed me and killed my career at the same time.
My. Well, let me start with some dumb questions. First of all, you're a scientist.
Yeah.
So why are you lying to all of us about the environment and global warming?
I cannot talk about alleged global warming. That is, as hypothetical as the moon landing.
Ah. So I did get to read a bit of in your book. From what I understand, and like I said, I'm real, you're on the next level brainiacs for me. So from what I understand. I
still have to sing the alphabet song to know which letter comes after Q. I mean,
nice.
Not that smart. I still have to do that.
Nice. But am I recording what we're doing? So from what I understand, you discovered the moment the universe was born?
Sort of. We thought we did. We thought we found the, kind of the earliest baby pictures you could ever take of the baby universe and its cute little baby bonnet. But that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to discover the spark. If you think about the Big Bang as sort of like an explosion, which is really not, but you can almost visualize it in some sense like that. And if you do so, you would naturally perhaps wonder, well, what lit the explosion off? What set this firecracker into motion?
Right.
And that spark is a process that even more brainiac people that talk to me like I'm an idiot, these are theoretical cosmologists, call it the period of time known as inflation. And inflation caused the whole universe to expand like a giant balloon from a very microscopic, subatomic sized volume into something, much, much more large. And that process we were trying to take a picture of, if you will, using microwaves and something else called gravitational waves. And we found what we were looking for. Eureka. We found exactly what we were looking for. And it turned out that what we saw was not exactly what we thought it originally was purported to be. So that's part of the title of the losing part of the Nobel Prize.
But okay, so in the beginning of the book, and I'll be honest, I didn't get very far into it because we just met 48 hours ago. I'm not that fast of a reader.
That's right.
But you started on like Team A, And
Right.
then you started working for a competitive team B. And then team A gets nominated for the Grammy, and they're like, and we're taking you out of the credits.
That's right. Yeah. So before we realized, or before the team realized that we had made a mistake and detected not the origin of the universe itself, but rather something much more prosaic, namely cosmic schmutz is the technical term for it.
What is mosaic? That's a real
prosaic. Prose
prosaic.
boring. A simple explanation that we had seen this actual imposter rather than seeing the actual birth of the universe. We saw the schmutz in the universe that's called dust. And
Is that where the Yiddish word comes from, schmutz?
Yes, it's exactly from there. Yes, and we are known as klutzes. No, I'm just kidding. No, schmutz is schmutz is a very technical. No, it's I'm just joking. It's known as cosmic dust.
See how dumb I am? I was like, that's a real thing.
Yeah, that's right. That's
exciting.
Where the Yiddish got it from. So we measured an imposter. What we thought was the Big Bang was actually basically soot and debris that's in our own solar system and in our own galaxy, and not from the Big Bang itself. So we had to retract our discovery. But before we retracted it, and the day that we announced it was actually St. Patrick's Day, 2014.
Were you drunk?
March 17th. And it was done in very Irish town of Boston, so everybody was a little bit tipsy, but that doesn't explain why we made the announcement that later had to be retracted. In other words, the mistake was one of kind of overreaching and trying to pull out more information from our data than could reasonably be done. And so when that happened, but before that happened, before we had to retract it, the leaders of the experiment thought for sure that we were going to win a Nobel Prize, because everybody told us we were going to win a Nobel Prize if we ever made this measurement, and then lo and behold, we made it. And so everybody thought they would win it. And I was the person who had helped to create the experiment in the beginning in 2001, so 13 years before this momentous St. Patrick's Day announcement in 2014. And so for a while it seemed like I would lose the Nobel Prize because of being cut out of the sort of credit for originating the experiment. And then only later did it become clear that no one was going to win the Nobel Prize, and it shouldn't have been announced in the first place. And so that led to at least first half of the meaning. It's really, it's a very very sophisticated title. It's what the French call a double entendre. And when what the second meaning of the title is not only did I lose the Nobel Prize, but I came to realize that I could be also responsible for getting rid of the Nobel Prize because of a lot of the negative effects that it has on science and scientists since in the 122 years after it was created.
So, just more dumb questions. If
there are no dumb questions. I always say there are no dumb questions, only dumb questioners. Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I'm the best. Okay. So if I do something I feel like is so extraordinary that it should get a Nobel Prize, is it similar to the Oscars, to the SAG Awards? Am I campaigning to get a nomination, or am I just hoping my pals recognize me? That's
not a dumb question at all. In fact, people don't really admit it, but scientists are just as greedy and obsessed with credit and awards and honors as the quote unquote normal people are. But we look down on Hollywood, and we make fun of them because they're always giving out awards and hurting their shoulders, patting themselves on the back. But in our case, we really we're kind of searching for this signal, in part to win a Nobel Prize, of course, in part to really want a genuine desire to understand how the universe works. But it's absolutely true that one of my professors who lost a Nobel Prize himself in 2013, he told me that one of the most important tools you can have as a scientist are public relations tools. And that really kind of surprised me. But what he meant was that when a scientist makes a discovery, the first thing that usually it's a he. Unfortunately, the Nobel Prize is very sexist and mostly goes to men. In fact, it's only gone to women less than 1% of the time that it's been awarded. And the other issue with it is that, it goes to this kind of old boys network that really starts in Sweden of all places, where the Nobel Prizes are awarded, and it's a lot about who you know and how much publicity and attention your laboratory can get, your students, your advisors, your university, and your country can get. And so there are enormous things at stake. I always say, people say, well, I don't think any scientist starts off and saying my whole goal is to win a Nobel Prize. And I think that's true. But just as with the Oscars, I point out that, every year you see these SAG awards, you see the Golden Globes, you see the Palme d'Or, the Toledo Film Festival.
The Webbies.
The Webbies, yep, the Nickelodeon Golden Slime Awards, and you always see how they always list how many nominations they've received for different actors, actresses, and cast members, whatever, and that's because the movie studios, even though the actors and actresses might not set out to win Oscars, the movie studios sure as heck want their actors and actresses in movies to win as many Oscars as possible.
Well, it's the same thing, even on a smaller scale. Like, I'm in Chicago, and I worked in storefront theater, and we have the Jeff Awards, which is like the Tony Awards, but for small storefront theater in Chicago.
Yeah.
And basically, if you got nominated for a Jeff Award, it meant your houses would sell out. And so sometimes you would really pander to the Jeff Committee, hoping that they, like these old retired people who go see theater, will like your show so that they'll nominate you, and then everyone in the world will come see you. And if you don't get nominated, sometimes that can crush your show.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, the whole point is that humans like to get credit for things that they do. The more credit you get, the more credit you'll get, and that's called the Matthew effect, or the rich get richer. And it happens in science just as it happens with the awards you just mentioned, and it happens in any field where you have people competing for a limited resource, which in your case is attention and selling out houses and stuff like that. In my case, it's funding from NASA or the Science Foundation, where there's only so much to go around. And in fact, it's in decline, as it is in your industry too, because people have so many things that they could do other than go to a show or fund science or learn about science. They could be doing watching cat videos all day on YouTube, right?
Or Netflix. Jeez, oh Pete, Netflix. So more dumb questions. What is the difference between the Nobel Prize and a Pulitzer Prize?
Very good question. So they were started about the same time. The Pulitzer Prize typically goes for writers and journalists and so forth. But the Nobel Prize has a category, the category of literature, which right now, if you can believe it, is in the midst of a torrid sex scandal. So can you believe that?
No, I can believe it.
That the very placid, very, these Nordic, these Swedes and Norwegians, they're in this torrid, sex scandal that's going on. But it's in the Literature Prize, and it couldn't be better timing for my book's publicity, by the way. But I didn't time it. I didn't have anything to do with it. I was not the culprit or the victim. But what happened was the female lead of the Nobel Committee in Literature, her husband had committed adultery and also allegedly sexually assaulted women for decades. And then he was kept on the Nobel Committee, and then she was fired. So the woman took the fall for the misdeeds of her husband. And furthermore, the King of Sweden had to intervene and cancel the Nobel Prizes in literature. And so the Nobel Prize in Literature and the Pulitzer Prize have about the same length of duration. And the Pulitzer Prize, there's this thing called Google Trends. So if you can break away from Googling yourself or your exes, a person can find out how the popularity of different words has changed with time. Mm-hmm. So if you look up, Donald Trump, it's going to start peaking in the 80s or whatever. If you look up Nobel Prizes, it was very low until like the 1950s and 1940s. And before that, if you looked up the Pulitzer Prize on Trends, on Google Trends, you'll see that the Pulitzer Prize was much more popular than the Nobel Prize, until there were some famous misdeeds where it was given away to people for covering up genocides, and it was given out to so many people that it just became kind of devalued. So they're comparable awards within their own fields. The only overlap is that the Nobel Prize has a category for literature, so you can win actually a Pulitzer Prize, as one of my friends did here at San Diego. But you could also win a Nobel Prize in literature for poetry. But they're vastly different in terms of the worldwide prestige that you get from winning it.
Oh. So The president wants a Pulitzer Prize for what he's trying to do with Korea. That kind of all fell apart today, but
Yeah, he could get it for the Art of the Deal, but I don't know if he could
I
get
think
it.
that's too late. Is it too late now? Can you submit like old books? Like,
Well, that's the
guys,
thing.
don't forget my book I did 2 years ago.
That's the thing. So Alfred Nobel, in his will, he wrote down, here's what I want to happen with my money. He was never married. He had no children. So he said, instead, I'm going to give all my money to these 5 different prizes. And one was added much later, about 80 years after he died, called the Economics Prize. We'll talk about that later. But the Nobel Prize in Literature, just like all the other prizes, they were supposed to go for things that were discovered or written a year ago. So you're supposed to get it for the best book written in the preceding year, or the best physics discovery in the preceding year. And almost immediately after the first Nobel Prizes, they got rid of that. They just made up their minds that they weren't going to adhere to what this dead guy wanted, who founded their whole enterprise. And so there's no reason Donald Trump's book couldn't win a Nobel Prize in Literature, just as there is no reason that an effect discovered, 50 years ago just won the Nobel Prize last year.
Really? Did that really happen?
Yeah. There's an effect that in 2016 that was discovered in the 90s and some of it in the 80s. And it was awarded the 2016 Nobel Prize. And that was the year I was a nominator for the Nobel Prize. So I went from being a potential nominee, to being a nominator and not being eligible to win the Nobel Prize because my experiment had lost its chances by making a blunder of some sort, or at least having to retract what we discovered.
So when you become like a nominee, so you're like a judge on Top Chef, right? Like, you have to
nominate. Yeah. A nominator is the judge. Yes, that's right.
So did people send you gifts? Were you all of a sudden getting all these dates? Like, how'd that go?
Yeah. So it was funny because I got this letter in the mail the day after the Nobel Prizes were awarded for the preceding year, for 2015. I got a letter in the mail and it said, we have the honor, from the Swedish Royal Academy of Science, we have the honor of asking you to nominate the winners of the Nobel Prize for 2016. So a year later, I would be, partially responsible for who would win it. And when I had that, when I had that honor, so to speak, it was also came with a lot of requests and conditions. And some of those conditions I just didn't adhere to, especially the one at the top that said strictly confidential, do not tell anybody about it. And as I show in my book, I printed it in my book, the letter that they wrote me, a facsimile of it. So, the odds are I'm not going to submit too many more nominations in the future after they get wind of my book. Do you care? You seem like you don't give AF. No, I really don't. I've come to see it as really very as a basic vanity that I'm no longer as entranced with. I'm freely, in admission of the fact that I wanted to win the Nobel Prize very desperately as a young scientist, because I was told that was the key to getting tenure, which is the golden, ultimate golden ring in academics. I told it was the key to getting funding and getting a notion of being a success in science. And now, it's kind of gone full circle for me, because I've come to realize that it's basically this hollow thing that's made by a committee to enhance and solidify their kind of dominance in the world scientific affairs. And you see it now with the Literature Prize. I mean, I can't imagine anybody wanting to win the Literature Prize except for, pure vanity, as a reason, because it's so corrupt. I mean, now there's as I said, the King of Sweden even canceled it this year. And there's a financial crimes, basically organized crime unit looking into it in Sweden. So there's a lot of problems with it. And I hope that people will be able to we'll be able to kind of see through the smoke and mirrors of this accolade for what it is, which is that it's really not that great a thing for science anymore. And I think if they want to keep it, they should be careful, because there's only a limited time window when these things are really popular. And just like what happened with Hollywood, Oscars and Me Too and everything, the exact same thing is going to happen with the Nobel Prize. In fact, it's already starting to. Yeah.
Did you get to make an audiobook of your book to read it?
I am I'm about to receive a contract to do that, to record an audiobook, but I've been told that I have to audition. So I am not
really?
Yeah, I have to audition. So I'm going to work on my James Earl Jones or whatever his name is. I'm going to work on my deep, mellifluous voice. Yeah, it's not guaranteed to go to me. I might have an upper leg, leg up because
You can
because I
pronounce
do.
all the big words.
Exactly. I can pronounce all the words, but I could teach you how to do it too, I'm sure.
I guess.
You could gun for it. But it's like reading a script for a movie or something like that. There's dialogue in the book. It's also a personal book. It's not I'd say it's about a quarter of the book or less is about the Nobel Prize itself and what's wrong with it and how to change it for the better. But most of it's about my personal journey in life and as a scientist and trying, as anybody has, to win some big award and then coming up short. And that's kind of the hopeful message of the book as a self-help guide to dealing with loss and frustration at science's ultimate upper echelon.
So what are you up to now? What's happening now?
Well, when I'm sober, I am.
I bet.
I have a lot going on. I've got 5 kids now.
5? You need to sleep
Yep.
on the couch.
5 kids. That's right. Well, I told my wife we're halfway done, and she agreed I think she agreed. She punched me right in the nose. She could have punched me elsewhere, right? No, my lovely wife and I are blessed to have 5 kids, including twins that were born a couple days before the book was launched. So things are busy here with that. And then the other thing I'm doing is running a huge experiment. So one of the problems with the Nobel Prize is that only 3 people at most can win it, which is 2 more than Alfred Nobel even said were able to win it in his will. And so I make the case in the book that experiments like mine should be almost excluded from winning the Nobel Prize. So I want to intentionally take not only myself out of the running for the Nobel Prize, but all my loving colleagues, because there's a problem when you go looking for something. You can if somebody told you this is the exact play that you have to do or exact performance you have to do to win that award in Chicago, then you did it, you'd be maybe it would be something okay, but you might also be compromising a little bit of your artistic integrity or your creative integrity to do that. And so I think in science, when people are looking specifically for effects or it can sometimes, and adhering to these artificial strictures of 500 white guys in Sweden, it can sometimes compromise science's integrity. And if science's integrity is compromised, I think it's really bad for society. So I make the case that we should not really pay heed to the Nobel Prize anymore and just do the research wherever the scientific questions take us. So I'm in charge of a big project called the Simons Observatory, which has not 3 people, not 30 people, but close to 300 people working on it. And this is a huge telescope project in Chile that my collaborators at Princeton and UPenn and UC Berkeley and I are working to build, and many other institutions are working to build at about 17,000 feet above sea level in the Andes Mountains. So it's really remote, very desolate, kind of like The Martian, the movie The Martian. It looks like all around us. So
you guys are like naked Matt Damon butts or what?
Yeah, we only eat potatoes, and no, we're not so fortunate. I did meet Andy Weir, the author of The Martian. He went to UC San Diego, my home institution, and we talked about how the movie is required viewing for all my students before they go to Chile and have to operate remotely because lest they get left behind by their PhD advisor, namely me.
So wait, how does this work? Like you have an idea, like I want to take a picture of the moment the universe was born, and then you call all your friends, like, hey, you guys, I have this idea. Do you want to do this with me? Is that kind of how it works? Because that's how it works for me and my stuff usually.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's kind of like, it's more like a small business or a startup or an app. We're really starting, we're studying, I always call it the Big Bang as the ultimate startup, right? There's nothing that happened before, maybe. So you get an idea, and if the idea is sound, you can start to convince other people. But like many things, first there's some resistance and people don't really want to go for it. And then there's, people say it's crazy, it's stupid. And then later they might start to come around. And in the end, they say, oh, it was obvious. And we all thought of it, before you, and you're stupid. No. But in this case, the idea was very solid because of the mistake that this experiment Bicep, that's the central character of my book, made. We learned a lot from that experiment. It didn't really make a blunder. It just measured something other than what we intended to measure. But in doing that, like, let's say you go out in the morning and you're driving you're driving to work in Chicago, and it's May there, so it's still snowing, and there's snow on the windshield, and you can't get to work, driving with the snow on your windshield. So what are you really doing? You have to remove that snow. So how do you do that? First, you do an experiment to detect it, so you see it with your eyes, and then you do some way of removing it, which in that case might be turning on the windshield wipers. In our case, the dust in the galaxy we can't remove. We can't physically go out there and remove it. We can see it with our eyes or our telescope, but we can't remove it. But what we can do is say we can basically see through it, because if you had that radar or infrared or something, radio waves go right through the snow. That's how you can hear the podcast even if this car is covered in snow. So you could use another kind of signal to look through the contamination, the snow in the case of the car that I'm using. So all those tools can apply equally well to our experiment. So we learned from BICEP, and now in the new experiment called the Simons Observatory, we're building in the capability to not only see the beginning of the universe, but also see the schmutz and get rid of the schmutz by clever mathematical tricks that we can play by observing at multiple what are called wavelengths. So that was really the killer insight that my colleagues had, that we could actually go even beyond what BICEP did, using the advances that we learned about from BICEP, but improving upon it in many ways over.
Are you just so much fun at parties?
Yes, I'm extremely illuminating and fascinating. No, I've been told that at parties, if it's a slumber party, I'm quite popular.
Nice, your audience. So I have some other dumb questions. When I first heard, what is your title? Cosmetologist?
Yes, I am a cosmetologist.
It sounds like a makeup guy.
Yes,
like a guy who makes makeup.
Exactly. So no, I'm a cosmologist. So, but the words are similar. And I did a comedy routine once where I talked about this. I was called the Standup Cosmic. And my routine, in reality, the word cosmetology and cosmos have the prefix cosm, which in Greek, as all your listeners know, cosm means beautiful appearance. So a cosmetologist is one who studies how to make the human face beautiful appearance. But a cosmologist studies the beautiful face of the universe. So they are related. It's not unrelated.
Who stole from who? Who started it?
Well, I like to think that we all stole from the astrologers. That was the original, of all this good stuff.
I watched this movie on the airplane because there was not a lot of choices. But Newman's energy machine was, you don't know? Oh, this is big science stuff.
I watch a lot of movies, and I don't know if you have 5 kids, but
I have 2.
Many planes. Okay,
because
good.
I have restraint.
That's a good start.
So it's the scientist named Newman is his last name. I have to look up his first name. But he made a perpetual energy machine.
Okay.
And a lot of people said that that's not possible.
Yeah.
And he was trying to get a patent on this machine, and he had some professionals who backed him and said no, yeah, actually his machine works. It was powered by a battery, but it was like this giant thing.
Okay.
And then you had other professionals who were like, no, it's impossible. And then he's a crackpot. And also, I guess he was a little racist, a little more racist than, your wacky uncle.
Mm-hmm.
So people didn't like him. So he ended up dying, never getting his patent. And this is a documentary about him and his machine and these people who followed him.
Wow. And
you didn't get to see it. So what I know nothing about that, but it was this giant perpetual machine or perpetual motion machine. And the reason that perpetual motion can't exist is because it just can't.
Yeah, it would violate what's called the second law of thermodynamics. So you have to conserve energy, and you also have to conserve something, or at least manage this entropy. And anything that generates energy has some resulting frictional force that will compensate for it. So if you ever swing a pendulum back and forth at the swing with your kids, the swing will eventually die down. Its energy will dissipate, and it won't swing anymore. But if you were in space where there's no atmosphere and you get, taken in by Child Protective Services, but even if you went to a place like the moon where there's gravity to pull the pendulum down, it would still eventually stop moving because there's friction between the string and whatever hub or wheel it's spinning on. So you can't actually get something for nothing, even in a vacuum, as long as you're using actual realistic materials to build your devices. So the patent office gets millions of applications, or not millions, but a lot. It's kind of like their most frequent thing, and people think of some way to get energy from nothing.
And you never heard of this guy?
No, never heard of him.
He's supposed to be like super famous crackpot scientist.
Well, if they made a movie about him, I think that they might have exaggerated his importance a little bit to sell tickets to win that Academy Award, right?
I don't think he was nominated for any awards, but it was playing on my United Airlines flight app.
Oh, very cool.
To Florida. Do you have any dumb questions for me?
Yeah, so I would like to know, you kind of joked about, me as a physicist not being fun at parties, but is the sense that people have that there's really a big difference between a professor, a scientist, and a quote unquote ordinary normal person?
Well, I get this a lot because I'm a comedian and actor, so often people don't consider me to be a normal person.
Yeah.
I was just going through this game show casting, and they were like, well, we want people to think you're normal. And I was like, as opposed to.
Right. Abnormal.
What I think that for me, it's like you're real smart, and I feel if we were at a party, I would probably not say very much because I wouldn't want you to think like, oh, what an idiot this girl is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Like,
you'd be self-conscious about
right, because you seem like, well, he's very accomplished. He's done very important things. He's written a book, which is like way more than I've done in my 41 years of life.
Still time.
So it just feels like you would become someone at a party that I'd be like, oh, he's kind of important. Like, I should not upset him or something. I don't know what would go on in my head. Like, I would want him to think I'm normal and not weirdo.
Right.
So
I see.
Yeah. So
it's more self-consciousness than anything else.
So it's like you're real smart. You're very accomplished, and so I like meeting different people's kids' parents at my kids' school.
Mm-hmm.
I have a 13-year-old and a 7-year-old. So when I would meet my now 13-year-old's friends' parents, two things would happen. I would say, "Oh, I'm a performer. I'm a comedian," and either they would be like, "Oh, that's so cool. Tell me about that," or they'd go, "What else do you do?"
What's your real job, right?
Yeah. What do you do for money? And you're like, well, actually, I do this for money.
That's right.
Not a lot of money.
Right.
So there's always that idea of there's a little bit of judgment of whatever the hell I'm about to say. Mm-hmm. So either they're going to be overly excited like I'm a celebrity, or they're going to be underwhelmed by what I am as a person. So there's always when I meet real people, I'm always a little self-conscious. I don't want to embarrass my kids. Don't want to embarrass my husband. My husband works in financial. He's a computer programmer. So when I go meet his employers, it's like I'm meeting royalty. I'm always like, hello, sir. It's very nice to meet you. No second glass for me. Thank you. So,
right.
Yeah. So there's a little,
So I understand that. Yeah, I actually did stand-up comedy once at the Comedy Store, not in L.A., the one in La Jolla, of all places, San Diego, where I live. And the reason I did it is because I did a TED Talk in 2014, right after these events of the bicep and the dust and everything. And I wanted to bomb, first in a smaller setting, where people were much more inebriated than they would be in my ordinary TED Talk, and maybe not as inebriated as my students are in my classes, but at least I'd have a bouncer there. Okay, I'd be able to prevent people from throwing things at me, unlike my students again. So I wanted to do it, and I found that there was really there were a lot of books. There's actually books about how to give a TED talk. There are books about how to do, but there's no books on how to be a stand-up comedian. And I'm wondering, what do you have?
They're not well written. They're not very well written.
What resources? I want to do it again because it kind of gave me a rush when I did it. And
well, here's the funny thing about me is that I'm not a stand-up comedian.
Okay.
I'm a comedian in the sense of Tina Fey or Amy Poehler. So my background's in improv and sketch comedy and comedy writing.
Yes, and?
Yes. Oh, yes. See, you're familiar. So the thing is, and I teach at the Second City in Chicago. So I teach writing at the Second City. So that's also interesting sometimes to tell people. I have this 7-Eleven that I go to. It's right by my house, and I love it. I go there probably at least once a day, at least. Right. And so I know the manager, and he calls me sister, and hey sister, how's it going, and all that. He asked me once, and he's from India, and he asked me once, what do you do for a living? And I was I'm about to impress this guy, right?
Right.
I said, have you heard of the Second City? And he goes, no. And I was like, have you heard of Saturday Night Live? And he goes, no. And I was like, have you heard of Tina Fey? He goes, no idea. And I was like, well, it's a big deal. I was like, God damn it. But yeah, so that's interesting because sometimes people don't know what Second City is. But so I teach at Second City. So I've done stand-up, but it's not my, and I've done solo performance. That's probably more my comfort zone, storytelling and solo performance, rather than stand, deliver, joke, set up joke, set up punch. I've done it. I'm not great at it.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's cool. Well, I'd like to visit you someday there at the Second City. It's famous.
Yeah, and I don't also get to perform at Second City.
Okay.
Not
you get
a privilege.
To teach there. You teach there.
I teach the students. I get to direct the students' graduation projects sometimes, and I get to teach them writing and joke construction. Mommy's not good enough to be on the stage, so.
Well, if you come across any resources that would help, have you ever heard of James Altucher? He does a podcast.
This is all very new to me, this podcasting world. I've gone really far in the casting process for this cooking show on Netflix called Nailed It.
Oh, cool.
And so I thought, which I don't know that I'm going to get. It's really weird. It's kind of in a weird place right now where they're like, we can't tell you if you're going to do it, but you might, but you probably won't.
Keep your September open.
Yes, exactly.
Thanks a lot. Right.
So I was like, if I do get to go on Netflix, maybe I should start something that I could launch people to afterwards. So that's why I'm starting this podcast. I don't know what I'm doing at all.
Are you referring to the physical concept known as the side hustle?
Yes. Yes, I am.
This is what I teach all my graduate students.
You got to have a side hustle.
Could be anything from Uber to podcasting, and anything in between.
Anything in between. So yeah, so this is
cool.
This is something I'm just.
Well, I hope you get it. I hope you get it. And I could say I was on a famous culinary masters podcast before she won the James Beard Award.
Right.
That's the Nobel Prize of cooking.
Oh, I don't know anything about that either. So you don't want to win awards anymore. You're like, and even because you could get a Pulitzer for your book, right? Could you?
Yeah, I could also. One of my critics, she wrote kind of a nasty review, but then at the end, she wrote a nasty review that she disagreed with a lot of my arguments. That's fine. I don't, I'm not putting a hit out on her house, which is located actually on Elm Street. No, I'm just kidding. She's overseas, so you can't reach her. She's untouchable. But she wrote a kind of a, little bit snarky review. But in the end, she said, I really love his writing. And, perhaps the next Nobel Prize Keating will lose will be the Nobel Prize for Literature. So she was sweet in that sense. And so I say, people don't believe my sincerity about the problems I have with the Nobel Prize. All they have to do is offer me a Nobel Prize and see if I accept it. And then they could see if I'm a hypocrite or not. So it's on you, Swedish Royal Academy. It's your move. Ball's in your court. Nobel ball.
Excellent. Anything else you want to ask?
No. I think this has been great, and it's been fun being your lucky number 7. Did you say?
I think you're number 7.
All right, great. Well, okay, this has been a lot of fun. and I'm going to go change some diapers.
Awesome. Thanks so much to my guest today, Brian Keating. If you would like to find his book, How to Lose the Nobel Prize, please download it on your...
Losing the Nobel Prize.
Losing the Nobel Prize.
Well, actually, the alternate title was Killing Nobel, but Bill O'Reilly has the trademark on that, so
what?
I couldn't call it Killing Nobel. No, I'm just kidding.
See?
But it's Losing the Nobel Prize, and I'm on Twitter and at Dr. Brian Keating, and my website's briankeating.com. And you can enroll in one of my advanced graduate classes in quantum relativity.
No,
so
probably won't do that. Won't do that. Sorry. Thanks so much for following along. If you want to follow along online, use the hashtag idiottalkshow. Follow us on all your social sites, and hope you have a great week. Thanks for listening to Talk to Me Like I'm an Idiot. You can find us on all your favorite social channels at Idiot Talk Show. Make sure you subscribe anywhere that you get podcasts. And make sure you tell a friend. We can't grow without your love. Make a comment and we will definitely comment back. Have an awesome week, everybody.
I don't wanna be alone in this bed. Won't you give me something I can take